Good evening. This is Forum Daily for Wednesday, April 13th. I'm Nathaniel Dewick, filling in for Nima Rajan. The Bank of Canada is raising its key interest rate by the highest amount in more than 20 years in the face of rising inflation. The central bank is increasing its policy rate by half a percentage point to 1%. It's warning that rates will need to rise further, while also raising its expectations for the inflation rate. It is also easing pandemic-era stimulus measures by beginning so-called quantitative tightening later this month, when the government bonds it holds will no longer be replaced when they mature. In making its interest rate decision, the Bank of Canada says the spike in energy and other commodity prices in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are driving inflation higher than its earlier expectations. It now says the annual inflation rate will average almost 6% in the first half of this year, compared with its January forecast of close to 5%. Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau believes it is right that more and more people are using the word genocide to describe what Russia has done in Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden used the word to describe Russia's actions for the first time yesterday, telling reporters that, quote, Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being a Ukrainian. Mr. Trudeau was careful to point out that there are official processes that will determine whether the acts meet the international definition of genocide. French President Emmanuel Macron today would only say that Russia is fighting an excessively brutal war that has been established that the Russian army has committed war crimes. A new report from Statistics Canada reveals 93% of shelter residents were there for reasons related to abuse, and 84% were fleeing intimate partner violence. The report says call volumes increased, but shelter admissions dropped by 31% when compared to 2017 to 2018. Caitlin Geiger-Barswich, Communications Director for Women's Shelters Canada, says the government messaging at the start of the pandemic led to confusion around accessing shelters. She says the report highlights the need for the federal government to begin implementing the National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Gender-Based Violence. This was prepared by the organization on behalf of the federal government and submitted last April. Well, it was a snow day for many students as a major snowstorm sweeps from southeastern Saskatchewan into northwestern Ontario. Visibility is poor, flights are cancelled in and out of Winnipeg, and tonight's Jets-Kraken NHL game has been postponed. RCMP have also shut down some major highways in Manitoba. Up to 50 centimeters of snow is expected by Friday, with reduced visibility as winds gust as high as 90 kilometers an hour. A Newfoundland and Labrador nonprofit has teamed up with a Toronto think tank to ask the government for a minimum wage hike. Food First NL and Food Insecurity Research Group Proof have co-authored a submission to Newfoundland and Labrador's Wage Review Committee. Their paper draws on research which says that increasing minimum wage decreases the prevalence of food insecurity. The province's minimum wage sits at $13.20 an hour, which is the fourth lowest in the country. Well, an Alberta judge has found former provincial justice minister Jonathan Dennis in contempt of court. Justice Doreen Sulima made the ruling after Mr. Dennis sent a letter last week threatening to sue a plaintiff in the middle of her testimony in a civil trial. She says he was trying to intimidate Dr. Annie Sauvageau, who is testifying in her lawsuit, accusing the Alberta government of wrongfully terminating her contract as chief medical examiner in 2014. While staying in the courtroom now, Canada's largest grassroots Muslim organization is asking an Ontario court to halt a federal audit of its activities as a registered charity. The Muslim Association of Canada alleges the probe, initiated by the Canada Revenue Agency 7 years ago, is discriminatory and violates its charter rights. The group, which promotes community service, education, and youth empowerment, says over 150,000 Canadians use its mosques, schools, and community centers each year. It claims that since the audit began in 2015, it has been tainted throughout by systemic bias and Islamophobia. Well, Health Canada says that almost 1.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines held in a national inventory expired in January. The 1.5 million expired doses amount to less than 2% of the 118 million doses delivered to Canada since December 2020. There are over 18 million doses in Canada's national stockpile at the moment, the vast majority of which will expire in the next 4 months. Health Canada says that until late last year, demand for vaccines was largely in line with supply, so very few doses expired before they were used. Expired doses are not immediately tossed, while Health Canada awaits word from the manufacturer about whether or not the expiration date can be extended. Well, amid the sixth wave of the pandemic, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer is recommending a vaccine plus approach. We'll have more on that up next, so stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back. Well, with the sixth wave of the pandemic already hitting some parts of the country, Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam is urging everyone to take a vaccine plus approach. She says that includes getting booster shots if you can, wearing masks, and limiting personal contacts. Dr. Tam says a booster dose further increases vaccine effectiveness to over 90% against severe outcomes. Her advice comes as scientists are saying that an extra contagious version of the Omicron variant is spreading globally, although it does not seem to be causing more severe disease. Well, with us to discuss the sixth wave and the vaccine plus approach is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at the Appletree Medical Group. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start with this. Dr. Tam says Canada is experiencing a sixth wave of the pandemic. What does this mean to viewers across the country?
Right. So what we're seeing this week, COVID-19 hospitalizations and cases are on the rise all across Canada, marking really the beginning of the sixth wave. As of Monday, the 7-day average of lab-confirmed cases sits just below 10,000, which is nearly a 50% jump from just 2 weeks earlier. Hospitalizations are also rising with about 5,000 people currently receiving care, up about 17% from last week and 30% above the number 2 weeks ago. So we're seeing a steady increase there. Of those who are in intensive care, we are seeing approximately 400, which is a slight uptick. So projections do show that these hospitalizations will continue to rise in the next 2 weeks as part of the sixth wave.
Dr. Tam is urging a vaccine plus approach to the pandemic. What does this look like?
I think it's very smartly named approach. Vaccine plus is basically a layered approach where we take precautions to reduce transmission, protect vulnerable people, and really ease the impact on the healthcare system. So vaccine plus masks, vaccines plus limiting personal contacts, vaccines plus boosters. So it's an interesting shift to personal responsibility. No one is forcing you to do these things, but we do know that it's the right thing to do in the middle of a COVID wave. And these are all very important measures to consider as we approach many holidays, such as Easter, Passover, and Ramadan.
Absolutely. So is this any different, this vaccine plus approach, from what public health authorities have been recommending throughout the pandemic?
I think Dr. Tam has also acknowledged that provincial and public health authorities are trying to encourage good habits without necessarily forcing them on people. But context is tremendously important. I think in different communities, depending on the context, the social cohesion, and other variables, each of these policies works a little bit differently and under different circumstances. So in many provinces and territories, we have some differences in these recommendations. But I think people are really keen to see and trust that we as a whole are able and willing to employ a lot of these changes and layers of protection as part of Vaccine Plus.
Very interesting, Dr. Raut. So meanwhile, today, the CDC is reported to be extending the travel mask mandate for another 2 weeks. How does public masking protect public health?
So community masking substantially reduces the transmission of COVID-19, really in 2 ways. First, masks prevent infected persons from exposing others to COVID by blocking the exhalation of virus-containing droplets into the air. This is what we call source control. The aspect of mask wearing here is especially important because it's estimated that at least 50% or so of transmissions are from persons who never develop symptoms and those who are in the pre-symptomatic phase. So blocking that source control is tremendously important. Second, masks protect uninfected wearers. Masks form a barrier to large respiratory droplets that could land on an exposed mucous membranes in the eyes, nose, or mouth. So masks can partially filter out small droplets and particles from the inhaled air. There's a lot of diversity of masks out there, so it can be hard and confusing to know which to get. But broadly speaking, multiple layers of fabric or material are better than single layers.
Well, shifting here, we know the growth of stealth Omicron is spreading globally. I know we've discussed it before, but what do we know about it? What do we know about stealth Omicron?
Stealth Omicron, or BA2, is an extra contagious version of the Omicron variant. It doesn't seem to cause more severe disease. It was first identified in November, and it really has spread around the globe. It's the dominant coronavirus strain in Canada currently, and more than about 5 other countries. It's given the name stealth because it looks like the earlier Delta variant on certain PCR tests. And the original Omicron, by contrast, was very easy to differentiate from Delta.
Interesting. Well, just about 15 seconds, Dr. Rout, but where can viewers go if they want to learn more about whether they're eligible for booster shots?
Well, we know that the best place to go would be your local province and territory's health website to look for booster eligibility. And if you have any follow-up questions, always discuss with your family doctor.
Dr. Abhishek Rout, thank you very much for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Well, stay with us. We'll be right back here on Forum Daily. Welcome back. Up next, we take a look at energy prices and policy across Canada. We'll speak with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. He also runs the gas prediction website, gaswizard.ca. All yours, Dan.
Well, thank you very much for that, Nathaniel. And what a week we've seen, what a week we're about to see. We're heading into the Easter long weekend. And of course, gas prices, like oil prices, like geopolitics, is all over the map right now. We've seen prices dip today, Wednesday, and into the weekend. We've seen some pretty decent, relatively speaking, prices. We're still 50 cents, 45 cents a liter on average, higher than this time last year. And diesel prices are probably closer to 60 cents higher than they were this time last year. Of course, that is highly inflationary because diesel and other products, natural gas included, tend to be at the core of our economy. It really doesn't matter what you do. And so we've seen prices average, down as low as $1.62, but that's pretty much where the party is likely to stop and end. Thursday, we're going to see a pretty substantial increase across much of Canada, including Quebec and Ontario. We're going to see prices rise about 6 cents a liter. We are also going to see a shift from winter to summer gasoline. When that happens, it's supposed to be done by Friday. Refiners are going to have to pass on that cost. Normally they do it a few days earlier, so that could mean an additional 6 cents a liter. That would push average prices up well above $1.72, $1.73 across Canada. Now the Maritimes, which always have a bit of a lag time of a week, and have these regulators who invent numbers on the fly because they've been up and down much more than their level of tolerance, which is 5 cents a liter either way. We're likely to see a decrease of about 2 or 3 cents a liter for gasoline, 7 cents for diesel. Whereas Western Canada, which has seen some drops in Alberta because of the compliments of the government there at the beginning of the month, dropping the 13-cent provincial tax, we're likely to see prices remain in the mid 150s. Saskatchewan still holding out in the 165, 168 range. Manitoba, which is very surprising. Gas stations there should understand at $1.73.9, you're picking up a cool 21 cents a liter as a retail margin. That's well beyond economic, what would be considered economically reasonable, especially since most stations can get by with 10 or 12 cents a liter, including the cost of turning on their pumps, paying their taxes, paying their overhead, and yes, honoring credit cards. So perhaps a little bit of need for them to curb their enthusiasm. British Columbia will continue to see prices in the $1.90 range in Vancouver and in the low $1.80 range for the rest of the interior. The difference there, of course, being simply taxes. On the bigger picture, we've seen the Biden administration do something that was both bizarre and odd and never intended, along with the International Energy Agency, and that's to try to flood the market with reserve inventories of oil. And that is not having really the desired effect. Yes, it brought oil down to $93 a barrel, but right now it's back up to 102. And it's a really short-term, unintended move that was never, designed for that. It's not designed to tame prices, to tame emergencies. And clearly the Biden administration is desperate. Rather than recognizing their own green policies of divestment, miseducation, their policies of strangling future pipelines have a lot to do with why Americans are falling short in terms of their ability to help the world. Europe, of course, has already gone through that, have empowered and emboldened Mr. Putin, continue to do so, financing his war to the tune of $1 billion a day. Very shameful, by the way, for the Europeans and those promoting green. It's very obvious that these processes, these ideas, this over infatuation with climate, which tends to be an exaggeration as far as even the IPCC's numbers are concerned, is leading the world to the precipice of a very dangerous place. So, in a week in which we are going to sit back with family and contemplate the importance of Easter, we're also going to have to recognize that it's a time for Canadians and the rest of the world to get real about the importance of energy, particularly fossil fuels, particularly its production here in Canada, which could go a long way to stabilizing the world. Perhaps it's time for Canadians to push back on their politicians and by those who are promoting one agenda to the detriment of the country, not just fuel, but also food and global insecurity. I think as we spend some time this weekend with family and friends, let's celebrate the fact that Canada is blessed with abundance of resources and that the price that we're paying today is incongruent and inconsistent with what Canadians should be pursuing, a policy of getting our energy to market. On that happy note, happy Easter, everybody. And here at Canadians for Affordable Energy, we look to talk to you next week.
Lots to consider there, Dan. That was Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. He also runs the gas prediction website, gaswizard.ca. Well, stay with us. We'll have news from around the world up next, so stay tuned to Forum Daily. We'll be right back after the break. Finland and Sweden are moving closer to joining NATO. The Nordic countries have traditionally not been aligned militarily, but public opinion has changed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Polls show a majority of respondents willing to join the alliance in Finland, while the supporters of NATO in Sweden clearly outnumber those against the idea. Finland shares the EU's longest border with Russia, while Sweden has no border with that country. Moscow has warned Sweden and Finland against joining NATO, saying it would respond with retaliatory measures that would have military and political consequences. An expert report commissioned by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has found clear patterns of international humanitarian law violations by Russian forces in Ukraine. The report was written by experts selected by Ukraine and published by the Vienna-based organization that promotes security and human rights. It also flagged some violations and problems attributable to Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has denied his troops committed such atrocities. The presidents of 3 Baltic nations and Poland arrived in Ukraine this morning in a show of support. The leaders from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were traveling to Kyiv to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky. These countries all border Russia or its enclave of Kaliningrad and have been providing Ukraine with defensive weapons. Well, meanwhile, in the U.S., the man arrested in the shooting of 10 people on a Brooklyn subway has been charged with a federal terrorism offense. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Breon Peace, announced the charge against Frank R. James, age 62, at a press conference Wednesday afternoon. Mr. James is accused in the Tuesday attack on a crowded rush-hour train. 5 people were in critical condition after the morning shooting, but all 10 gunshot victims are expected to survive. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it has received fewer reports of new COVID-19 cases and deaths last week. This was the 3rd consecutive weekly decline. The WHO says the trend may be the result of the dismantling of testing and surveillance programs. The WHO says it's monitoring several mutations of the virus that are descended from the Omicron variant. These include some recombined forms of existing subvariants. So far, there's no evidence that the new subvariants spread any differently than the original Omicron variant. Well, doctors at a hospital in Ethiopia's embattled Tigray region say patients are dying amid shortages of life-saving drugs and oxygen. A doctor at Ader Hospital in Mekelle, Tigray's capital, told the Associated Press that more than 60 patients with kidney disease have died since July as a result of a lack of supplies needed for regular dialysis. Tigray in northern Ethiopia has been cut off from the rest of the country since late June. The UN has described the situation as a de facto blockade by Ethiopia's federal government. Well, Australia and the United States are stepping up diplomatic outreach to the Solomon Islands after China signed a security deal with the South Pacific island nation. It could lead to Beijing establishing a military presence there. A Chinese military presence in the Solomons would put it not only on the doorstep of Australia and New Zealand, but also in close proximity to Guam, with its massive U.S. military bases. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says flooding in the Durban area has taken over 250 lives and is a catastrophe of enormous proportions. He says the floods are part of climate change. Officials said Wednesday that the death toll is expected to continue rising as search and rescue operations continue in the KwaZulu-Natal province. Mr. Ramaphosa said the province is about to be declared a disaster area by the national government. People had to flee their homes as buildings and infrastructure were swept away. Durban Port was also flooded. While energy is not the only commodity affected by Russia's war in Ukraine, the conflict has pushed up fertilizer prices that were already high, made scarce supplies even harder to find, and has pinched farmers. Higher fertilizer prices are making the world's food supply more expensive and less abundant as farmers skimp on nutrients for their crops and get lower yields. While the ripples will be felt by grocery shoppers in wealthy countries, the squeeze on food supplies will land hardest on families in poorer countries. Well, it may be difficult for some in Canada to believe, but spring is in the air. Thousands of tulips are in bloom this week. This to welcome visitors to the opening of a once-in-a-decade Dutch horticultural exhibition called Floriade. More than 25 nations are presenting sustainable ideas during this year's show, which is focused on making urban areas more sustainable and healthier places to live. This as people around the world increasingly move to cities. Dutch King Willem-Alexander opened the park on Wednesday. The exhibition runs through October 9th. I'm Nathaniel Dewick, filling in for Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily.